Every year, millions of tourists unknowingly touch one of the seven wonders of the ancient world. They think it's a castle. They're wrong. Its stones were carved over 1,000 years before that castle ever existed, on the Turkish coast, yes, by hands building something entirely different. And that's only the beginning, because of the seven wonders the ancient world considered its greatest achievements. Only one is still standing. Other six didn't just erode into dust the way ruins usually do. One was shaken apart by the earth itself and left lying on its back for centuries. One may have burned because a single man wanted to be remembered, and one, the most famous of them all, might never have stood where legend says it did. What actually happened to these monuments isn't really a story about destruction. It's a story about what every civilization eventually does with the past. And by the end, you'll understand why the fate of these wonders says less about the ancient world than it does about us. To stand before these structures as they were meant to be seen was to feel deliberately, calculatedly small. Colossus of Rhodes rose over its harbor at a height close to the Statue of Liberty, cast in bronze, melted down from the siege weapons of an army that had failed to conquer the island. A monument built, quite literally, from the wreckage of someone else's defeat. The Lighthouse of Alexandria burned a flame ancient sailors claimed was visible dozens of miles out to sea. In Olympia, a seated statue of Zeus reportedly came so close to the temple's ceiling that visitors joked the god would break the roof if he ever stood up. These weren't just buildings. They were arguments in stone about what human beings, and the rulers who commanded them, were capable of. Which is exactly what makes their disappearance so hard to accept as simple accident. If you think earthquakes explain everything, they don't. But they're where the investigation has to start. The Eastern Mediterranean sits on some of the most seismically active ground on Earth, and no ancient engineer was building for earthquakes the way we do now. Around 226 BCE, an earthquake snapped the Colossus at the knees, ancient sources report, and here's the detail that stops people. It didn't fall into rubble. It lay there, whole but broken, for over 800 years. For 8 centuries, visitors traveled long distances to see the fallen giant lying in the dirt, rather than a standing monument anywhere else in the world. Its shattered fingers alone, reportedly too thick for a person to wrap their arms around. Imagine spending a life building something meant to outlast empires, only for it to spend the next 8 centuries as a tourist curiosity, flat on its back. The Lighthouse of Alexandria went the same way, just slower. A sequence of earthquakes across 13 centuries, with the final collapse recorded in the early 1300s, and this is where the investigation delivers its first real surprise. In the 1990s, French archaeologist Jean-Yves Empereur located enormous carved blocks on the seabed of Alexandria's harbor, blocks believed to be pieces of the lighthouse itself. Divers swim past them today in the same water that light once guided ships through. But none of those stories surprised historians nearly as much as what happened to the next one. Because some wonders didn't just fall. They got repurposed. When the Knights of St. John needed a fortress on the Turkish coast in the 15th century, they didn't quarry new stone. They walked to the fallen ruins of the Mausoleum at Halicarnassus, already toppled by centuries of tremors, and took it apart piece by piece. Carved marble reliefs, sculpted for a king's tomb, were built directly into the fortress walls, almost as decoration. Part of one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world literally became part of a medieval castle. That's the castle from the opening. For centuries, sightseers walked past fragments of it without anyone telling them what they were looking at, because almost nobody left alive still knew. This is the part that should genuinely unsettle you. Nobody hated these monuments enough to destroy them. People just needed stone, and the finest, most expertly finished blocks in the region happened to already be lying on the ground. Not every wonder went quietly, though. The Temple of Artemis at Ephesus, burned in 356 BCE, allegedly set alight by a man named Herostratus for one reason only. He wanted his name remembered forever. Ephesian authorities were so disturbed by the idea that they made it a capital crime to even speak his name. The law, obviously, ironically, failed. His name survived anyway. The temple was rebuilt even grander, only to be destroyed again centuries later. Its marble scattered into buildings that still exist today, unrecognized, which means a piece of a 7 wonder may well be sitting in the background of someone's vacation photo right now, doing nothing more glamorous than holding up a wall. Even Zeus at Olympia didn't escape human hands. Ancient sources disagree on the exact details, but the most widely cited account holds that the statue was eventually moved to Constantinople, and where a devastating fire in the 5th century CE is believed to have destroyed it, though the record here is thin enough that historians hold the specifics loosely. And then comes the twist that undoes the whole list: the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. The wonder people find most enchanting may never have stood in Babylon at all. Over a century of archaeological excavation, there has never turned up a single trace of terraced gardens matching the ancient descriptions. Nothing. In the 2000s, Oxford historian Stephanie Daly proposed something that genuinely startled her own field: that the gardens actually existed 300 miles north, in the Assyrian capital of Nineveh, built not by a Babylonian king at all, but by the Assyrian ruler Sennacherib. Later writers, she argues, simply confused the two great Mesopotamian cities. If she's right, the most famous wonder on this list wasn't destroyed at all. It was misfielded by geography for 2,000 years, and its ruins may still be sitting under the wrong name. This is where evidence and legend genuinely part ways. The Colossus wasn't melted down by conquering armies and sold as scrap to a merchant who needed nearly 1,000 camels to haul it away, a vivid detail that comes from a single medieval chronicle written centuries later. Most historians treat it as folklore. The truth is quieter, and in its way, more human, not conquest, but time, tremors, and the ordinary need for good building material. What connects every one of these disappearances isn't violence. It's recycling. A king's tomb becomes a castle wall. A god's temple becomes someone else's foundation. Nothing humans build, however magnificent, is exempt from becoming raw material for whatever comes next. Only the Great Pyramid survives largely intact, not because it was better loved, but because it was simply too vast for anyone to bother taking apart. So the next time you see a castle wall on the Turkish coast, remember this. You might not be looking at a castle at all. You might be looking at one of the greatest wonders humanity ever built, hiding in plain sight, unnoticed, for 600 years and counting. Maybe that's how civilizations really disappear, not by being destroyed, but by surviving as something so ordinary that nobody remembers what it used to be.